Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work. Welcome back to KIMEcast. Russ Dunning, Tony Mikla. Today we're going to talk about value today, and specifically, obviously in our case, talking about value regarding physical therapist and the treatment session that we provide and what that looks like. And I think we can talk about multiple settings here as well. But it's a super interesting topic, and I think a really important narrative to start to think about as you're seeing a change in the economical form, if you will, of how the world's working, that we've been talking about value forever, but people are looking for value. They're not just looking for a thing or a product or a service by name, but actually now, what is the value of that to me and how am I going to spend my dollars? Because those dollars would be harder to come by, or they're more earned, or people have a more understanding of that money. So I think it's really, really important to speak to what is it that we're going to do as a physical therapist, as a provider, to provide that value and to get there. I think there's some striking stuff. You know, we have someone on our team, a couple people on our team right now that are affected by valued physical therapy or healthcare. I mean, I think if you've gone through the healthcare field, getting care, I think this is a huge topic for you. Is like, what is value of care and how well you're treated, how well you're heard, listened to, et cetera. And so just a quick story from one of our colleagues that's on our team that has a mom that's going through a situation right now where she has a neurological condition where she could definitely use hands-on therapy and skills we'd like to use, like PNF, and progress to more functional activities and get her up walking and move in this direction and such. And she's been in 3 or 4 different facilities now over the past 6 months, and our therapist continues to help guide her and get the right care. And in the process, she's just having a really difficult time emotionally as a clinician herself, being like, how do these other therapists sleep at night when she goes in and sees what's not being done for her mom? And an example would be that the treating therapist would go in and see her mom and spend the first 5 to 15 minutes doing some documentation, taking blood pressure, doing some basic skin examinations and things that are all necessary and prudent. Probably were just done by the nurse 10 minutes ago, though, so it's just repetitive information. Although I know there's protocol that require these types of things, but is that the right protocol should be a question. But nonetheless, we get to the point where she does that. She asks the patient a few questions, really never touches her in the form of like any kind of functional care, and then has to close up, write a few notes, and the session overall took 30 minutes, and absolutely zero was done with the patient of any value. Not even any passive range of motion of the upper extremity, lower extremity coming off of a neurological condition. So our colleague is like, how do these people sleep at night with like knowing like that's not what we got into this field for. Like that's not what good healthcare is. We know that there's things we could do, and we know that it's a critical window of time to do these things in the first 6 to 12 months so that these patients can have a chance of higher function. And it's not my relative in the situation in this case, but it's certainly discouraging and frustrating for me to hear something like that.
I think to couple with that, I think what we've heard a lot of new grads coming out of school, and they'll cite recent research, and one of those research items might be the lack of credibility of generalized manual therapy. Right. You can't prove if you're touching a tendon. You can't prove if you're impacting tendon healing or fascial healing. And when you look at this study, and there's no change in outcomes when you implement a lot of manual therapy, so that some of the younger clinicians are coming out thinking that really isn't great therapy. It's all about exercise. It's all about progression. And they're getting that from research. And then that's just a failure of research, because it doesn't take a genius to stick around this industry for a little while to see, wow, that person really changed with my touch. However you want to explain it, whether it was neurosensory, whether it was changing the tissue tone, something happened. And they're then the patient's able to do certain things after that manual therapy. And so I'm not so sure if it's like a laziness, incompetence, maybe just like a willful ignorance, or worse yet, the person feels they're quite smart, reads research, and applies it blanket statement across their entire practice and says, there's no validity with manual therapy, so I'm not going to do it. But either way, you see it in the hospital, you see it in the SNF, you see it in outpatient, a lack of good connection with your hands. And then, if you need manual therapy, go see a massage therapist. They just kind of park it out to the cash-based treatment, and hopefully that person's doing well enough to actually afford that on their own. So I think there's a few elements to that equation of like where our value is.
Yeah, no, 100%. We talked about this last episode on the evidence-based practice idea and what's proven to be effective. And I think it's difficult to prove that certain things like manual therapy in this case would be effective perhaps, but we can't deny that it is impactful when you're in patient care and you witness it and you see it and it opens a window of opportunity for the person to move better. And then certainly we want to use exercise to fulfill that window and retrain the body. I think the evidence is obviously strongest with that. And there's actually really strong evidence shows that manual therapy with exercise together yields by far the best results. As a matter of fact, exercise with almost every other modality like quadruples the impact of that modality when looking at outcome data of patients. So that's super exciting. The problem is we can't really prove why each of those modalities is exactly great, and therefore they get discounted and discharged out of care plans because they just aren't proven as to why. And I think that's not just because we haven't proved it yet doesn't mean it's not effective, right? We don't know what we're looking at. We haven't proved that putting ice on something could be effective either. So, but clearly that's been around forever, and it certainly helps people in certain situations. So there's a variety of things out there: right situation, right person, right case. But I think the bigger picture here is on this type of value. Like, we've totally misguided like the care in a situation like this example where someone comes in or spending more time documenting, more time doing protocol things than we are caring about the person in front of us. I mean, like, what's this person's goal? Like, to get out of bed and walk again. I mean, this is a perfectly healthy, active, 55, 60-year-old female that was completely independent 6 months ago, has come across some bad healthcare luck here and now in a position, but totally sharp, mentally ready, and able to, and willing and motivated to participate. And yet we have a therapist that is not doing anything, where clearly at least passive range of motion to maintain mobility would be effective. PNF and some sort of resistive exercise, whether it be a PNF strategy or a band or whatever you name it, gravity resisted of some kind, would be great. But at the end of the day, we get nothing. We go back to this kind of come in, check the box thing. Not too different than what we had in the late 90s in the orthopedic world. Come in and get heat, get ultrasound, get massage. That was the treatment plan. And this is one of the benefits of evidence-based practice is that's kind of gone in a lot of cases. Not in all, unfortunately, but that idea has dissipated a bit. But I think we need to start to challenge our peers and challenge ourselves internally to be like, what are we doing that's actually of value? What's going to really move the needle with people? Because we know that it's changing. We know that value is changing and how it's looked at.
Yeah, I think, to pivot a little bit of what is valuable, I think it's important to try and look at where the industry is going. And I think it's the wrong thing to do is to ask what are physical therapists doing, but actually look at what are patients doing. Because really patients, I think, will drive us to be better. And, for the past 2 decades, they just continually ask Google and ask WebMD and ask, the internet at large how to fix their issue. And that's quickly moving into a space of now I'm going to ask the internet. It's probably going to give me a pretty good response because the internet is somehow powered by some machine learning AI. It's going to give us some solution of knowledge. And I think everyone can agree that patients are coming in much more well-informed. Hell, I learned about BPC 157 because of a patient, not because of a book or my professor told me, right? So we learn a lot through our patients, and I think they're going to push us. And people are coming in much more informed. And I don't think, I think 20 years ago, the secret knowledge of how to deal with the tendinopathy was held in the PT's mind. That knowledge is not in the PT's mind solely anymore. It is in the internet. It is filled in a really great way with just a good prompt to any language model, and you will find how to address a litany of body issues. So people are coming much more informed. And then really, then what is the value? So what is the value of physical therapists? What are we even doing with people? Because whatever we're doing every day, you could say that's what we're practicing and refining. And if we're just checking boxes and giving a diagnosis, and I'll see you in 6 weeks as my schedule's too impacted to do anything else, I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think this is where we have to bring it. When you look at, I think the question that a person may have put in the search engine in the past is like, I have shoulder pain, what could it be, or, whatever, and you get a list of diagnosis and it gives you some text about it. I think the new artificial intelligence language models are different now, where you put in you can communicate with it back and forth, much like you would with the healthcare provider. And what that device is supposedly doing, and of course we could argue the information's a bit inaccurate and they're making up things, and you could say whatever you want to, but at the end of the day, in the next year or two, that's all going to be bogus, and this is going to be better than most healthcare providers out there, because what it's going to be doing is it's reading the research, it's reading the literature, it's reading what's being put out there by the world onto the internet platform, so it can read this stuff, and it's basically taking it and giving it back to you. So if you try it, write in, hey, what do I do for anterior knee pain? You'd be surprised about the detail of which it can provide in a step-by-step sequential manner of what to do about anterior knee pain. Now, you and I as therapists can both be upset about that, and we can be like, "Oof, that's wrong, that sucks." But who are we arguing with here at the end of the day? Like, that's the research that we read that's now just being put right in front of the patient. So we have to become much better than just, this is the literature, this is what's proven. We have to become an interpretation of that literature and understand where did it come from, why might that one be appropriate to you and your population in this particular setting, or why might that literature actually not apply to you for some reason, and maybe you should be looking at this other database that's a little bit different and suggest something slightly different than we first thought. The other thing would be, I think, coaching, that you take it from the interpretation of the literature, but then also discussing how you coach, motivate, and inspire that person, and you give them time frames and expectations about how long something might take. Because I think that's a piece that you're not going to get out of artificial intelligence at this time. Maybe we will get that in the future. But I think someone comes in and is like, hey, I was supposed to do these 6 steps of these 6 exercises, but it didn't work for me. My knee still hurts. Now what do I do? So I think it's just the bar is raised. And my point here is that if you're out there as a PT or any kind of healthcare provider, and you're just applying what the research has given you, that's already being done for free now.
Yep.
Your responsibility is now to take the person in front of you and really combine the two and truly coach, mentor, and look at that person as a whole, not just as a single diagnosis. That's something that's still not available, I think, online as much yet.
And I think that whole, let's talk about, because I think that is the key part of value of what we provide. To take someone entirely, we're listening to their history, we're sizing them up, seeing where they have mass in their body, what's their shape of their body look like. We're looking at the health and feel of their body when we move their limb. We're doing some special tests, and we're looking at movement, we're looking at gait, we're looking at kinetics, and see how does this person generate force and all those objective things. And then we're interpreting their emotional state. Are they fearful? Are they guarded? We're doing a lot of stuff that I think you could say it's probably impossible to do this part within 10 minutes. I'd say probably within more like that 15 to 20 minute realm when we meet someone. We're actually creating so much context of actually how to guide them. So I would say this largely detective mode. We're detecting where we're going to go from here. And I think why this is so important to figure out, what are we doing with people? What is the role of PT, and how are we going to help someone? If you don't start off on the right foot and truly connect with someone and listen to their life and try and get a feel of their story with a detective lens and an empathetic lens, then it's really hard to affect them whatsoever. You could, if I rush an eval and if I box you too quickly into a simple tendinopathy box and I run a simple program for you, am I no different than free AI for that person? Especially if I say, I'll see you in a month with your 5 exercises. Good luck to you. I'm going to meet another 300 people before I see you again. Am I actually not as valuable? It's something that's entirely free that they can access to right now. And if you're listening to this and you feel you're held captive by a model, that you feel rushed with your eval, and you're not so sure about how much value you added to that person, then I'd be very worried, because innovation and technology are moving so fast right now that person probably is going to have a fantastic answer for why they hurt. Right now, they just might not be fully aware of it. But that value is already there outside of the physical therapy realm. So as a detective, as an empathetic listener, as an influencer, we need to find value in that space.
I think that's one of the more interesting things that Russ and I get a chance to talk about at times offline and in this case on, but the change that's happening on that front, on this idea of value, and that you could be replaced we've always thought that like, oh, this like kind of contact, direct interpretation, hands-on service that we provide is probably irreplaceable and it will always be there. And I know that I've said that in the past, where I feel like it won't be replaced by a robot or by machines. And I think that it won't be. There will be parts of it that won't be. But to your point, there absolutely is pieces of it that will be. Extensively. There's extensive pieces of what we do that will be replaced and will force us to get better and better to keep up and be better than the replacement. And that we should not hate the replacement, but rather leverage the replacement and say, this is awesome. What we've used, like a system like ChatGPT for, is that we're not having to go and compile all of this research and data. It's a phenomenal tool to use to help compile it for you, to look at the literature. It will tell you what its references are. If you want to dive deeper into that, you can do that and make sure the system is accurate. But at the end of the day, it's actually going through a tremendous amount of content that would normally take you hours, weeks, and months to get through. And you can get through and get it presented to you in a very, very quick manner that you could really learn from and grasp what maybe you're looking to grasp in a very, very quick way. So the literature review process is much, much faster, which makes us that much more powerful and stronger when we go in and meet with the patient and we can identify things and like patterns together. I think is really powerful. But that tends to be the issue here that we see in the industry. We're like, oh, I'm going to get replaced by a machine or get replaced by a bot or something. And it's like, if you're doing something that's not valuable, yes, you will be, because that will be cheaper than you are. And so, yes, you should be worried. But if you're able to take that bot and up your game, raise the bar, and get to a point where you're actually now doing something much more valuable because you have all that behind you, now all of a sudden you put yourself in a position that's something much stronger and you're worth more.
Exactly. It's, right now, I'm sure, if you haven't played with AI, you really need to play with the large language models. And it's all about the prompts. You can't just say, fix my ankle or fix my Achilles. You kind of have to figure out what to say. Like, well, I'm gonna give it my own history, and I'm gonna tell I'm limping and it hurts when I do this. Yada yada yada. So the consumer has to explain the problem. Now, in our training, in our workshops, we reference the idea of a black swan, and it's a very important concept. The black swan is an unpredictable, unforeseen occurrence. That means when you're interacting with someone, the black swan of the interview, of the discussion, is something that's not known. The person didn't know that was important. And so when we're playing detective, when we're interacting with someone and we go through like, why did you hurt? Your back pain started hurting a year ago. You did this. We ask a lot of questions and we're playing detective. But we have to be patient with that part because the person's going to reveal something that they didn't know was important. And that is durable. That is value. And then the person should say, I had no idea that's it. You're right. I totally forgot that happened. I didn't realize that thing was doing this to my life. And we didn't know either. That's why it's called the black swan. It'd be a white swan if we all knew the same question to answer. And the questions of, is it acute? Is it chronic? What was the timeline? Point to where it hurt? Or were you lifting and rotating? Those are all basic stuff. But what about, you played softball as a kid and you hit switch, but you threw really hard with your right hand. That's interesting. So when we start adding up truly as a detective, we get into people's life, and that's irreplaceable. So no matter what we're doing, if you don't really get immersed into someone's life and play a fierce detective, and I'd say you should be replaced because you're really not doing that much for people.
So true. So I think that to bring it a little more full circle on that front, this is what we use a model, like we talked about, looking at the whole person. We use this model of like kind of these 4 pillars or 4 main categories, and movement being one of those 4 categories, which is what people come to see us for, right? They want to move better and they want to get back to the function they want to do in some regard, and maybe they're in pain or whatever. But there's other factors that impact our movement. The other 3 categories would be stress, management of stress. Could be anything in their body. Could be financial. Could be relationship based. Could be something at work, anything like that at all that's putting stress on their body. Stress, we know, really increases the signals of pain, whether it be back pain or you name it. We see that response throughout. I don't know whether that's proven in the literature or not. It doesn't really matter to me. I know it's true, so it is what it is. Then you have nutrition, which is a massive component, right? What are they eating? How are they fueling their body? Are they putting garbage in and then getting garbage out and wondering why they have the symptoms they have? So that's a huge part of is food and nutrition. And you could dive down a huge rabbit hole there if you like, or you can keep it relatively superficial. But that's certainly up to you how you want to coach and impact your clientele. And then you've got the other component would be sleep, which is pretty much indisputable at this point from an evidence-based standpoint that at least 7 hours of sleep for an adult and probably closer to 8 or 9 for a youth, depending on their age, is critical to their human function. And so if we see, I've come to find that of those 4 pillars, movement, nutrition, sleep, and stress management, if one of those pillars is out of line, I think the person can function quite well. And we consider them an optimized person in society. They're probably going to do just fine, and you wouldn't even know the difference. And it may not have a huge weight on their injury or the pain pattern they're coming in with. But if 2 of those categories are out of line, or maybe they can't move so much anymore, so they have pain now, so that's leading towards a bit of depression, and they also have some stress issues going on, something going on at work, something going on at home, something going on financially that's put them into a tough state. Well, now they've got 2 out of these 4 boxes aren't there, and you'll start to see that sleep becomes compromised as a result of it. Certainly nutrition is less of a priority and they can't focus on it. That becomes compromised. It really starts to get 2, 3, 4 of the boxes start to go out of whack. And then we have significant dysfunction as far as how that person's able to interact with life, do the things they want to do, and do the things that make them successful. So I think that we look at the whole person, that's it. And to me, that's probably beyond what is available for free through a chatbot type of system. Not saying it won't be. That might be coming. But in the moments right now, if we start to understand the person as a whole, and those are the 4 pillars that we use at Kime, but maybe there's a few other things you like to include, and that's great. No problem with that at all. But those would be the concepts where if you're not looking into some one of these 4, there's some people include a 5th category, these kind of multiple categories, and then gleaning from them, those are looking for that kind of black swan effect, if you will.
And if I was, the 4 things that you just mentioned, right now, there's wonderful books. I remember there's a book called Peak, another great literary read by Dr. Bubbs. Fantastic deep dive into these massive pillars of healing, regeneration, and optimizing performance. But if we can just, pretend and not take our ego out of the equation here, and let's just pretend that all this knowledge is free and we all have access to all this knowledge. So if you remember some special nut from research or you read a book and you feel like, oh, I really know in this space, I think that's probably largely your ego talking. It makes you want to feel really important. But let's just pretend all this information is already free, already available, and everyone can have access to it quite quickly. How do we influence those 4? And the fun things that are very durable is coaching movement with your feedback, your eyes, your hands, and telling people that's good or that's not good enough. Here's my external cue. Here's my focused position. I'm going to show you how to do it because maybe you're not a cerebral learner with movement. You actually have to see it, and then you can do it. Most people I find actually like that. I could explain the deadlift for an hour, or I could just show you one, and you get it instantly. So from a movement standpoint, coaching it irreplaceable unless we have a robot that moves like me. And maybe the Terminator, what was it? Was that T3? That was not Arnold.
That'd be a good robot.
The liquid metal guy.
I have seen that guy. There was a robot doing a backflip, and it's getting closer.
Oh yeah. As soon as he's fluid and he can dance like Slava, then we got issues. But coaching movement, I think stress is really interesting because with our hands we can calm situation. If the leg is in fear, especially if someone's neck or back are extremely guarded, our hands can change stress in a moment, and the person will give us that feedback, and we can feel it. And then we can coach sleep and regenerative modalities largely because we can give a feedback, say, I can tell you're underrested. We become an accountability coach, I think, for sleep and nutrition. Not so much of, let me tell you the importance of why you should have your fiber and why you should have your protein. I think giving context and key elements of that help us really influence someone with that knowledge. Again, pretending the knowledge is already free, it's already available, and will continue to be more available to people. It's really about the influence of those 4 pillars, and not some holding of, I have a graduate degree in this, so I know exactly what to do. Like, whatever. The whole world already knows what to do. Pretend it's already there. What are you going to do about it? How do you influence it? And so that, I think, is the durable concept.
Yeah. That's exactly the question of value, because if that was the case, if it was a situation where only the smartest person with the highest level degree was able to help people, then you wouldn't have all of these professions and all these people running around with illegitimate certifications or so-called whatever they have and their schedules are full, by the way, because they communicate in such a way, authentic or not, they communicate in such a way that people believe it and engage, right? If you look at we talked about Story Brand last time, a great book, Story Brand Business, and it talks about this idea of working with customers. And the customers are looking for a few things. They want to see empathy from the brand or from the person providing the service, and then they want to see authority. So this kind of goes back to the same idea. Can you connect with your person? Can you listen to them? Can you perhaps understand where they're coming from at the very least, and perhaps understand their problem, and have empathy with them? And then can you show them that you're the coach, you're the guide, you're the person that can step up and provide the solution to this problem that they're facing, because you're the authority on the issue. You have the knowledge, you have the ability to communicate that knowledge, and it's crystal clear. So what makes up authority is exactly that: communication and knowledge. So knowledge is now much more discounted than it used to be because it's free. Because you can go on and you can interact with the internet, and it will tell you a lot of information. And what most of the scholars are reading and writing out there is now clearly available, and these systems will go out and filter through it for you, right? So you can get a tremendous amount of knowledge very, very quickly. What you need to get is a bit of experience to layer that knowledge, understand what's important with it, and then the most critical part is then be able to communicate it with clarity to your person. So if you can show empathy and then be able to communicate your knowledge, that being authority, then you can be successful. But we have to be a little bit careful here, because if you look back in history, which is always good to learn from, we could take back to physical therapy in the 90s or physical therapy in the early 2000s. And if I was rehabbing an ACL at that time with someone and doing any kind of a knee issue, and I was doing knee extensions, I mean, you might as well have taken me out to the field and hung me from a noose, or, guillotined my head off. Because there's no chance that a physician or anyone else would ever send you another patient, because that would be the worst thing you could do in the world. And that was very true in 2004, 2005, in that era. Now, in 2024, if you're not doing knee extensions, then you're not solving the problem. You've completely bypassed it. And so you have to be careful as to, like, when we look at evidence-based and look at research and base it only on research, a lot of that stuff in the early years was based off we talked about small bundles of research, small sample sizes, and again, a misinterpretation of the data that was provided. That back in the day, it said that if you did knee extensions, to put more force in the ACL than squats and every other exercise that was commonly used. What was forgotten, the second part of that statement, was that it was 4 newtons of force, and the ACL is good to tolerate 24 to 26 newtons of force. So that 4 newtons is still irrelevant, but it is the most. So therefore, it's by far the worst thing you could do, and it's going to loosen up the graft, and the person's going to be ruined for life. We've just found out that that's not true. But that influenced a generation of not only physios, but orthopedic surgeons and of other healthcare providers by simply misinterpreting that small piece of data. So we do have to continue to go back to our knowledge and improve it and challenge ourselves, which I think this tool is a fantastic resource for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, finding value in what we do, there's the knowledge discussion, which I think is ongoing. And I was listening to Mike Reynolds' podcast as I was coming in today, and the end of this particular podcast got real in a hurry when he asked his guest, tell me what you recommend for young people. And the guest said, get a mentor that's experienced, not this fake shit that's on Instagram of people who don't influence people's lives. And he was really kind of calling out people that don't do the work and that are purely just all show. And I mean, to that point, no matter where your knowledge lies on, whether you're rehabbing a knee or you're doing a tendinopathy, thing, or you're doing a hip, a hip thing, they got hip impingement and trying to clear it. you do have to be careful about what principles you're hanging on. And if you're hanging on principles that are fairly superficial, oh, we're supposed to go knees over toes because the knee over toe guy said it. Well, we're supposed to, hinge with shins vertical because someone else said it. We should be asking why. Why weren't we doing knee extensions back then? Why are we doing split squats with knee over toe position by 32 inches right now? We have to ask why, and you have to really try and figure out, what do you believe in? What are the biomechanical principles, the chemistry principles, the physiology principles that you're basing everything off of? And if you, that's another big part of establishing trust with people, is count on the patient asking, why is this so? I can ask it to AI, and it's going to probably give me a pretty damn good answer. But I'm gonna have patients. Patients ask us all the time, why is this? And then we say, oh, it's because of knee compression forces. What do you mean? I don't understand. Why is it more compressive than walking downstairs? And so we need to be ready for the first why, the second why, the third why. And if the patient is not, how do I say this? If they're not bold enough to continue to ask why, if you give an invaluable response, they're just not going to come back to you because they didn't buy what you were selling. You have to answer the why with a credible response based off of principles that they can understand. And that's a big challenge for us. And if you follow with that line of thought, I don't think you'll be led astray by something new and trendy that's on Instagram because you're supposed to do Zercher squats with a twist because that guy's doing it. And he knows, look at how buff and athletic he is. If he's doing it, then they should be okay.
Must be the right thing. Well, on that note, I'd say that one of the big things that I've learned in that is there's very rarely like one thing, like one exercise, one modality, one intervention strategy. There's very rarely one thing. It's usually a matter of bringing multiple things together and having impact on a person's life as a whole, and understanding where they're coming from, probably doing a little coaching on their lifestyle as well as providing a little bit of exercise. But it's very rarely like, oh, you forgot this one thing, which is always kind of what you see put out there on these channels. Is like, oh, if you just do this, it'd be better. It's like that just isn't the case. If you just change nutrition as it being one of the 4 pillars, it's probably not going to be the thing. If you just add exercise, it's probably not going to be the thing. You've got to start to see it as a whole, so it's good.
Well, because when you think like that, then you look at a Jefferson curl for sciatica, and you say like, oh, all back pain should be doing Jefferson curls. Really? You're falling into that trap. It's the trap of really, it's like the 6-minute abs. You're falling into that, like, that's as deep as your brain goes.
Yeah, it's great. I think as you were saying that example there of kind of looking at the impact it has on a person, and they just like leave, right? They just won't come back, right? I think this is a huge problem in healthcare that a lot of folks. I think we have it probably less as PTs, if I was to say overall, but because we're pretty sensitive to when patients don't come back, I think we're relatively aware. Hopefully, you're relatively aware if your patients aren't returning that it may not be because you have magic hands and you fixed them on the first visit. There might be something deeper there that you're missing, unless they're all sending you emails afterwards saying you changed their life in one visit, and that's a rare thing. If that's happening, that's really tremendous. I actually had my CI one time. It was this certified. This is when I kind of started falling out of love with manual therapy at the time from this like Maitland very specific version. I was just finished being a student. I took the job and started working with him. He's a genius, COMT, like studied his butt off, read every book. I mean, it was just like certified and everything you could think of, fellow, the whole deal, And I was documenting back in our office. He comes back to the office. He goes, man, Tony, I had this lady, and I evaluated. She had a headache for like 2 years, and I did a cervical adjustment, and the headache's gone. And he's like, oh, man, it's awesome. I'm like, that is awesome. I'm like, it's pretty cool. And, he's looking at me. He goes, you don't seem that excited. I'm kind of like, isn't that what we're supposed to do? Like, that's what I've been taught, that like, great job, you did your job. They got rid of the pain. But then this next statement is the kicker. He goes, you don't understand. This doesn't happen very often. And I'm like, then what are we doing?
He just showed you the grand slam. That's like 1 out of 100.
Yeah, exactly. If this is working 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000 times, like it's not very good. Like I think we need to find a different vehicle or a different diagnostic pathway, or something is missing. The one thing isn't getting the job done. So I always thought that. I always go back to that, and Not that I don't believe in the technique or the thing, but my point is it's just not usually one thing. There's usually a bigger part of it. But Atul Gawande, a great author, wrote a great book. He has multiple books now, but the first one was called Complications. Then he wrote Better, and then a book called Checklist Manifesto, which went pretty viral. But in I think his Complications book, he really speaks about this as a surgeon, that when surgeons have complications in the OR or in the in their process or in their diagnostic process, they have to work through it. And he speaks it sometimes about a bit of a gut feeling that you have to go off of sometimes as a healthcare provider, as a surgeon. It's based on your experience. It's based on your gut. It's based on your natural passion for it is what you do, and probably why you were drawn to do it in the first place. It's a really interesting kind of concept. But one of the roots behind this concept that he felt was missing in healthcare, and I think a great thing to speak on, is that as the world has changed and we're no longer as welcoming of doing, what's the thing when after someone passes and they go and they do
wake, funeral, blessing.
Yes, but before that, they go in and they operate and they look and see why the cause of death was.
Autopsy.
Autopsy, exactly, that's the word. So he was, the likelihood of an autopsy is much less decreased now than it was earlier in medicine. So in the early 1900s and through the middle of the 1900s, autopsies were the regular practice. And so doctors would give a diagnosis in the hospital. They would treat that diagnosis. The patient might be successful. The patient might pass. If they pass, they perform an autopsy. They basically check themselves.
Feedback.
Was I right? Did I misdiagnose and therefore the patient didn't make it? Or did my treatment intervention was not successful with this patient? For what reason? X, Y, or Z? And he speaks to the idea that the frequency of autopsy now is significantly reduced. Much, much down. Like I think it's less than 10%. So what you have now in the industry is everyone walking around saying, "Oh, yep, you have this." In the hospital, "Oh, you have this. This is your diagnosis." How do you know? Because I do.
I don't need feedback.
Yeah. Where's your feedback mechanism? What if you were wrong? What if you missed something? And I guess the argument is like, well, I did blood work and I did a X-ray, MRI, CT, I saw all this stuff, and I have the whole picture. Do you? Is there another mechanism that maybe we don't have? So I think it was a great point in his book about it, and I think it's something to be authentic about as we are providers and healthcare providers at the end of the day, and ask ourselves, what is our feedback mechanism, and making sure we look at that and have something there, have an answer to that question, because that's probably going to determine your value.
Well, they talked about the research I remember in school 20 years ago, and I'm sure there's more modern research on it, of how many people just heal by themselves. They just let the thing pass. And best
treatment for back pain is walking.
Yeah, just general movement. And, I say this to patients whenever I see a person that says, all right, my shoulder hurts, and I've tried chiro, I've tried PT, I've tried massage, and it still has been hurting for the last 4 months. I said, great, you are my favorite patient of the day. And they think I'm joking. I'm like, no, because I know you're not just healing with just general movement. This is now fun. Whenever I meet people with some, silly injury that just happened 2 weeks ago, it's not as fun because, their odds are they're going to get better with or without my help. But you're a fun one. You have a chronic case that's pretty resilient to a lot of people's inputs. So let's see what was missed.
And that's always fun when we see them. I hate to see that they've struggled so long. That's my biggest frustration. But you're right. Sometimes it certainly makes it easier as they struggle more. It actually makes it more clear as to probably why they're struggling. Versus in that first 2 weeks, it's like, man, I could go down 400 rabbit holes here of what you should do differently. Sleep more, eat better, do these particular exercises, take this supplement. I could give them 500 things. Like, I don't know which one of those is really going to be the deal, or if you need to get the whole package. It's tough to make that decision. But as they go further down the process, like, okay, well, that failed, so we know it's not that. That failed, we know it's not that. So.
Yep. And oftentimes it's going to, I think the big nut to attack for most people is the thing that they're most fearful of. And say we find a movement that they can't do, and they say, oh, yeah, I can't do that. Every time I do it, it flares up. I say, perfect. That's exactly the path. Just no one's showed you how to dose it and actually give a body a fighting chance to adapt in that pathway. But it's going to take some time. And that speaks again to value. What are we doing? And if we're coaching people, through their limitation, through their dysfunction, helping them dose appropriately for their body at this point in time, now we're quite valuable to people. And that's really hard for innovation to solve because you need a person to person, you need a coach, you need an influencer to navigate those struggles. As you know, we often say in our teachings in Kime that healing is not a linear path. It's like it's a pirate map, a lot of squigglies, a lot of ups and downs, and we have to be ready for those regressions or those excitements of the pain syndrome, because that's just a sign that we maybe just pushed a little too much, but at least we're on a path. And I think that is exactly here to stay. Like, people are always going to need that person in their life.
Yeah. I think that coach is important. Made me think about this example. I had this lady, she was like 40 to 45 years old, had shoulder surgery. She's like 4 months out, was doing really well by all accounts. Great range of motion, strength was improving. She had improved in it about every way, but she was still having like this biceps pain, like this nagging pain in the front of her shoulder. And I had talked to her for like about a month about, hey, I want you to, you have to be careful about what activities you're doing. And she had gone back to work at this point, and that involved some computer work with the mouse. And she used her shoulder for that, for the mouse, obviously. So we talked about that frequency, not going to be a problem for her, And she kind of was like, oh, yeah, I'll fix it, And, a month goes by, and she's like, my shoulder still hurts in that spot. Like, what is the deal? And she's sitting there talking to me, like, kind of waving her arms around, And we had talked the week before about these accessory motions when you're raising your arms and you're moving your body around, and you move your arms when you talk. And when you do that a lot, like, it's going to aggravate the shoulder because it's still not used to that much movement at this phase in the healing process. She should have been better, but for some reason it was still giving her trouble. So it's pretty funny. And then she was like, Tony, I heard what you said, and I stopped doing it. And she's waving her arms all around like crazy when she's talking to him. I'm like, you're doing it right now. And she looked at me and she goes, this is what you're talking about? I said, yes, that's what I'm talking about. She goes, oh, got it. Week later, pain-free.
There is, that is never written in a book, and I guarantee you AI is not going to say that. I mean, that feedback at what you did, I'm sure that's probably one of the few times you've ever said that your entire life. Yeah. So how would you know to say that? And the only way to know is to pay 100% attention to the person, and then the solution reveals itself. But that is durable value.
Yeah. It was great because we're getting, like you said, get to know her well enough and have a session long enough where we can engage so that she was doing everything else right. Everything else was like, couldn't be better. And it's like, yeah, there's still this problem.
Okay, let me ask there, what visit, how long have you known this person? What visit was that? Let's call that was the black swan. That was the black swan of her journey.
Yeah. So I probably identified it, like I said, about 12 weeks or so in, I'm guessing, somewhere around 3 to 4 months. We usually started people post-op on week 1, so she's probably 12 to 14 visits in. I identified it about a month before that because I had started mentioning it to her in a much softer tone. Because you're right, I'm not usually one to be like, what you're doing is wrong. It's more like, there might be a better way. That wasn't working. So we had to go direct. But it would have been 2 or 3 weeks of kind of struggling with it before I was like, hey, like, that's it. And it was epic. I think there was a big pivotal point post-operative. She had a great surgeon and stuff as well, so there are a lot of good things there. But I think there's a pivotal point post-operatively at 3 or 4 months where people should really be turning the corner and moving on in a shoulder surgery situation. Whether it be she had a labral condition, whether it be labrum or a cuff or whatever. But nonetheless, it was a minute.
I think this is a perfect example of it's a person that demands high performance. Whether or not she was a pro athlete or a pro corporate person that's involved in fitness, she's demanding the best. And I think we have to really kind of ask ourselves, are we providing value in a disease medicine state? Basically like, oh, you're not dying today. It's weird to think of PTs doing that, but like, oh, the arm's connected. So, you can walk out of the office. Check. Or am I going to empower, am I going to help you live your best life? Which end of the spectrum? Maybe you're not 100% or 0% on either extreme, but which way are you leaning? And then what model supports that? What model allows you to do that? Because I asked that about the timeline, because if you saw this person for 30 minutes every 6 weeks, fat chance that you're ever going to find the black swan.
Right. You just keep giving the same stuff. And you're just kind of like, why isn't this working, I think another topic on that on value, one thing I learned in my career that this feedback idea that was important is obviously differential diagnosis and diving through that, which you're really not going to get good at for quite some time. And even then, there's just a lot of loopholes. There's a lot of reasons why it's not perfect. I mean, you can follow the algorithms, and I think they're great, and you can create your own and whatever, all that stuff. I think there's a lot to be done there. But I think your consistency in treatment planning is very, very important. And this is really important nowadays where we're getting so much dynamic information coming in, so many different kinds of exercises, so many different kinds of supplements and nutritional ideas, so many different kinds of diets, so many different and so many things. If you're working with patients and you're constantly, not necessarily with the same patient, but with different patients, okay, with this patient, we'll give them a little bit of this because it sounds like it's right for them. With this patient over here, we'll give them a little bit of that because it sounds like it's right for them. And another patient, you give them a little bit of something different. If all three come back in a week or two, how are you going to know if any of them are better or worse because of what you did? Or to your point, they just get better over time for whatever reason. Your feedback mechanism is flawed. So you have to approach it a bit like research, a bit like I would suggest heavily is why we use like our four box category. And we do have specific exercises that we choose from, although there might be 400 different rotator cuff exercises, not arguing which ones are better than another, but I tend to choose between 4 to 8 of them that are going to work for 80% of the population. And I try to get the population on that path first and foremost, because I know that if you're on that path and it's working for you, you're going to pass and you're going to get on the freeway and you're good to go. And I know that if you're on that path and it fails for you, I also know that now that I need to switch paths and you're going to need a hybrid program, and then I will have to get very custom with you. So it is important that you have a consistency in your care where with a certain diagnosis and a certain type, maybe it's a tendinosis condition versus something that's more impact sensitive on a bone versus something that's more rotational force sensitive. You might have different protocols you might want to use, but be relatively consistent for a period of time so at least you can get good feedback on, is that intervention strategy effective? Yes or no? And if it is, great, continue to use it and build on it. And if it's not, then start to poke holes in it. Why is it not? Am I missing something? Or do those people all have different nutritional levels? Do those people all have different sleep cycles? Those people all have different stresses? Is the chronicity of the case different? All these things I think you have to take into account. But that's at the end of the day. If you have a recipe, if you will, that yields relatively consistent success, and you develop that over time, that's what's going to help you have this knowledge base or experience base that's going to be of value.
I think as you talk, all exercise, all movement, let's just say of those 4 pillars, obviously as a PT, we're hoping to coach primarily in the movement sector, although we have to be mindful of the other 3, stress, sleep recovery, and nutrition. But, we're coaching movement, and it boggles my mind when people start combining things that they shouldn't combine. I'm thinking about the guy who did the heavy dumbbell bench press on a physio ball. And then the physio ball popped.
Right.
As physio balls do, and it popped, and the guy dislocated his shoulder.
He
right?
broke his arm,
yeah. So that's like you're combining things that didn't need to be combined, and I think that there's this urge if we actually just threw away the phone and threw away social media, I don't think we'd have all this stupidity out there. But people are combining things because that hasn't been done. If I put a band and I twist my trunk in a certain way, and now I do a press with 60 pounds with it, sideways. Why? When as you said that with rotator cuff, I think the rotator cuff gets a lot of heat because I hear younger people, and by younger I mean younger than me, clearly. So maybe they're in their 30s, their early 40s. God forbid they're in their 20s. But they start up. They talk about. I've listened to a few podcasts trying to prepare for everything we do, and I've hear the wonderful external rotation exercise, and they kind of poo-poo a really basic exercise done for 20 years, and I literally make a face in the car as I'm listening to the podcast. I make a face. I'm like, you mother effers! I did the exercise when I hurt my shoulder, and it felt amazing after I did it. Clearly, you haven't effed up your shoulder. Go ahead and injure it. And then tell me which exercise you want to lean on because you have to lean on something really basic and simple that doesn't hurt and that you can slowly progress. That's what you need. You don't need anything cute when you've injured your shoulder severely. And I look at the from the performance world, as you were talking about it, what came to mind was Nolan Ryan. I have no idea why he came to mind, but I was thinking that guy threw heat in the high 90s. Didn't he throw to well into his early 40s?
Yeah.
And he did this through the late 80s and 90s, 30 years ago. And why are we doing new rotator cuff exercises when 30 years ago we had a guy last longer than any other pitcher current day? It's not like we're making these massive gains with rotator cuff strength training. Clearly, because baseball players have a hard time lasting in the league. And yet 30 years ago, they lasted pretty nicely. So the point is the basics still work. And you don't have to think of all these cute ways of doing new things just to try and be shiny and something new and shiny in the internet world, on the social media world. Like, actually build off of just foundational principles. And if you apply some basics and foundational principles at large to your people, you start seeing changes and you start seeing where you need to be variable. Clearly, when an exercise hurts, you need to change it up. When it hurts in the wrong way, not in the right way, that would be constructive pain. But side note, the point is I think younger people need to build off of prior knowledge, not try and reinvent the wheel. Stand on my shoulders. Don't try and rebuild from the ground. That takes way too long, and you're going to fail doing it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that at the end of the day, agreed. Find things that are stable, that have kind of stood the test of time, and that's a good example of one, the sideline external rotation. But don't get stuck there. I know you'd believe the same thing here, because Russ doesn't do very many traditional exercises beyond those first basic few, trust me. But the concept is, stick with what we know is effective. We don't skip those things. And then get creative as you've built a base and a foundation that you can build on. You can have some creativity and have some fun. I think one word of warning I'd put out there too is that we are in a free market economy. And if people have a new idea and a new invention, it's lucrative to then sell that to everyone and tell them it's amazing.
New and shiny.
New and shiny. Yeah, so like the Bosu ball is a great example of this. Not to say that the Bosu ball is a good or bad tool. I really don't care. I don't like it. I don't use it. I don't have any purpose for it in my life with my people, my situation. It's my thing. I have nothing wrong with it. I just don't see any purpose for it. But they've sold millions of them. And many, many people use them all the time for reasons I don't understand. But that's fine. As long as they're getting better, I could care less. But be careful about what things you have to have or have to be in your rehab program because it's somebody else said it did, or whatever. If we go back, this unstable surface thing is always a fun topic in conversation. For me, from the beginning, because it just doesn't make any sense. It never made any fundamental sense for me, and it still doesn't. And so I have a difficult time moving in that direction. I obviously, that being in an unstable surface stimulates more receptors. Great. Do we want more receptors stimulated? Is that how it works when you're walking around the earth? Do they need 4,000 different change of direction stimulations when all we're looking for is a vertical load through the ground? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think that they do. So for me, it's tough, and we do have evidence suggesting that working on those devices decreases power production. We've seen that. So that's what I've seen clinically as well. So I'm not a big fan of them. Not to say they don't have a time and a place. If they have a time and place for you, great. But just don't think like, oh man, that's cool. That guy's doing it. I have to have one. No, you don't.
Well, yeah, because you watch the Instagram. I just watched the guy he jumped over something with one leg and then jumped onto a Bosu ball at a diagonal and landed and held a position. I'm thinking, how many times did he do that shot before he didn't fall? And then if you can do that exercise with people, how many falls in the set are you saying, this is not a good exercise? If you fell 2 out of 10, 9 out of 10, you got the one that did it right. Oh, copped it on video. Post it. Yeah. How many quality reps are we doing here?
back to the why. Like, what's your why? What are you doing it for? What's your intent? And if there's a sport that requires you to land on an unstable surface on one leg, then I'd love to hear about it. Maybe it's a new sport. Sounds great.
Going back to any exercise.
Definitely need a PT. I could tell you that, because there'll be a lot of injuries. That's for sure.
Yeah. If that's what we're in the business of. I think no matter what movement you're doing, you should be able to grade its success. How would you know it's successful?
Absolutely.
And same thing with our experience. How would you know you helped someone's life? And that goes back to value, where we started this conversation, is did you change a life? And then what's that worth? And how much time does it maybe take to change a life? I've changed very few lives, I think, in an hour, but you give me 20 hours and I'll change it forever. And then there's the stuff in between.
Couldn't agree more. Bring value. Change lives.
That is durable. AI will never do that. The technology innovation should just help us do that better, to connect and coach and influence. But if you're not changing people's lives, what are you doing? And I think in a few years, you probably shouldn't have a job because you're not that valuable to the world. Doesn't really matter what the business is paying you. if you're not changing people's lives, things have to change. That's just how growth is.
Yeah, I was gonna think we should cut this there, but now that you said that, I think that needs to be stated that if you're in a situation as a therapist and you're making a lot of money as a therapist, but you're not so sure your value is high, you're not changing lives, this is a risk factor for you. You should start to look around because you may not have that position for as long as you think. I think you're going to see change there, and I think in some of the larger organizations are doing some phenomenal stuff with technology, have been for quite a while, and built amazing platforms. And this was an industry that 10 years ago was discussed as irreplaceable and will always be there. And I think that's true, but I think how it's going to look, how it's going to feel, and what we actually are doing are going to change. It's changing a lot quickly. Over the last 5 years, it's significantly different than it was 10 or 20 years ago, that's for sure.
My wife got medication. We belonged to a big box insurance 2 years ago, and she got this medication. So we went to the big box pharmacy, and it felt like the Ford assembly line back in the 1960s. You had all the pharmacists that had exactly 19.5 seconds with each person, and it was just like a humming system. I mean, to step into that pharmacist world, like they probably literally look at someone and read the label and then give it to someone. They probably must help like 832 people every day, you know, like talk about mind numbing, talk about what just happened. It was like a carousel, just boom, boom, like an assembly line, boom, 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 boom. And, if I owned, the big box chain and I had a PT outfit and I could automate the whole thing with AI, and I just wanted the PT to diagnose. Like, give me just the main limitation, then boom, spit that out to, that's what you're turning yourself into. If you've seen your 45-minute treat go to 30, go to 20, go to 15, why would it ever stop? Isn't it just going to keep going down? Because they're learning that they can pump more people through you and just use innovation to do the rest.
And you're not having any more impact. Whether it be 15 minutes or 45 minutes, your impact's not changing.
Yeah.
That's what the world is telling us at the moment with this profession, is that on a large scale, the notion is the insurance companies are not going to pay more money because there's not value.
It's not value. So then that person's getting...
So they get paid the same. So the only way that a company you work for can make more money is to have you see more patients. So then you get thrown, and everybody complains about that in this industry, that we don't get paid enough, and we don't get paid enough to do what? Don't get paid enough to deliver value and change lives.
But now you get paid.
Well, you better do it then.
Say you get paid $150K to live in that, that hamster wheel. After 10 years, what kind of experience do you have? Is that experience applicable to the world?
Yeah, great point. We recruit that. So when we looked at our incoming staff and people that are on this team, we're interested in, have you coached people? Have you made a difference in people's lives as part of the process? Because if you have been on that hamster wheel, coming in to our environment, you're going to really struggle, because it's not at all like that. It's not this repetitive game that you just stay on it. You actually have to think. You have to engage. You have to have the empathy. You have to have the authority, the ability to communicate, to do these things effectively, so you can really engage patients and make that difference. But it's amazing to see someone and see the challenges that they go through. They go through mentally if they've been in such an environment like that.
Yeah, then experience is worth very little, because you've had experience being a hamster and not a detective or a coach. That's what it is. It's coaching someone's life.
That's value.